I'm Dan Drake. This is Front Up on Geno TV and Channel 99. We have today Bruce Miller, a favorite guest. Thank you for coming back, Bruce.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
Good.
It's always nice to be here. Thank you.
We want to talk about town meeting.
One of my favorite topics.
You like town meeting. I recall you telling me you thought it was...
Really?
Yeah,
really?
Sort of.
I find it entertaining, but I don't think it's a very effective way to conduct our government. And I think you and I agree on that.
That's true.
And I think we saw, the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen a great demonstration of some of the flaws in town meeting. In many ways, town meeting each year takes on a personality, and it's almost has the capability of being schizophrenic. So,
and part of it is explained. I mean, we've got a couple of specific matters we've got to talk about, but we have to talk about, not gotta. To me, it's interesting where the time is spent and the issues that take up a lot of time, partly because they're not explained well. And I mean, for example, the animal one that took seemingly forever was really a minor change in the law. But the way it was presented, everybody thought it was new.
And we probably spent more time on that than virtually any other article.
That's right. And because of roosters, and if you ever had a peacock next to you, you'd have voted for that.
Right. And other articles, which are very complicated, we try to oversimplify and rush through because it would be more difficult to make sure.
Do you have a favorite?
I think Article 18 comes to mind immediately. The sewer article, which I think didn't get the attention it deserved at any level. I think it needed more attention at town meeting. I think it needed more attention at every prior level where it was kind of approved or recommended. There's just too many unanswered questions.
And I know you mentioned them at town meeting, but maybe some of our audience wasn't there. So
well, the most interesting thing to me was, and I learned a lot of this from Duell McIntyre and in the letter he wrote to the Inquirer and Mirror. At a recent selectmen's meeting, the University of Massachusetts science people who tested the harbor, read a report that very clearly stated that the quality of the harbor water in the lower harbor is improving, and it's, I think, good and improving. There's still significant issues in the upper harbor, especially Pulpus. They, amongst other things, they pointed to the fact that we had taken some steps to deal with stormwater runoff in town, which was a big problem, and I know we've invested millions of dollars in that. And then, of course, we know that in the near future the jetty is going to be raised, which, depending on different people have different opinions. There's no question it's going to have a positive impact. No one knows exactly how much. In addition, we passed fertilizer regulations 2 or 3 years ago, which to this point have been strictly voluntary. There's been virtually no enforcement, and fertilizer contributes almost as much nitrate to the harbor as does septic. So there you have one positive trend, one anticipated positive trend, a third potential positive trend, and then all of which are working in the right direction. Then, on the other hand, you have the option of spending $40 million to sewer areas of the lower harbor, which, as we said, are improving, and which the reports have said will have very little impact on the upper harbor. So it just seems like we should have let the jury come in on some of the things we were doing before we bought into this investment, I think.
What's your response to the argument that you need to do all three of these things because you're doing it at the margin? And all of them are needed to, throughout the harbor, bring the levels up to where they're mandated, which is an issue.
My response is that I wish somebody could prove that to me, because I don't think anybody knows for sure.
That's probably true.
Yeah, and I think the other factor that we haven't talked about is the fact that the clock is ticking on the 0% financing. So rather than wait to get all the facts, it's like, well, we don't want to miss that opportunity. We got to make a decision, which I also don't 100% accept. I think it's highly unlikely that 0% financing will go away forever, given the demands of many other areas of the Commonwealth. And in fact, it's not, whatever the amount is, it sounds like a lot of money, but
those things do go away. I mean, the airport, not that specifically, but when the airport was considering a solar field, for electrical power, there was a state program that provided a credit. You know, and everybody said, well, we had to get in under the deadline for that. For other reasons, we decided to go forward. The credit was not renewed.
True, although I think it'll be a little different with sewers because it's such a compelling need, and there are areas like the Cape where I think they're facing billions of dollars of need, which they'll never ever be able to do it without some help.
Right.
But
well, it's interesting, and
Yeah.
we'll see what happens next Tuesday.
It is interesting.
I guess this is going to be on this weekend, so we'll know. But it's a you know, from my perspective, it's probably a top priority because of the shellfish and so forth. I mean, clearly something is killing the eelgrass.
right.
And but there are reasonable people who can disagree on these things. And
But I don't think, again, not to beat it to death, I don't think the eelgrass in Pulpos Harbor is going to be helped at all by this new sewer.
that's probably true.
Yeah.
that's probably
And
true.
we need to figure out what would help the eelgrass in
Right.
Pulpos Harbor and address that.
Open the hall over.
No, that was brought up.
Interesting idea.
Yeah, it was brought up. I remember Finn Murphy actually called me, and back in when he was still here and a selectman, he said, "What do you know about opening the harbor?" I said, "Nothing, but I'll call Wes Tiffany." You remember Wes?
I do.
Wes
I
was
do.
the director
Yeah.
of the Massachusetts Field Station, and I had to hold the phone out to hear when I called Wes because the expletives that he emitted were about how crazy it was.
It was such a bad idea.
It was such a bad
Yeah.
idea. And it will change the character of the harbor. It would change the character of the harbor to do that. But that's what oceans are for and beaches are for, and they do go back and forth. So, who knows?
Well, the same report that that talked about the improving quality of the water in the lower harbor, specifically said there are some streams that feed into Pulpos Harbor and the upper harbor that are problematic and that, for whatever reason, hadn't been tested for an extended period of time. I think it's literally the case that we resumed testing about a year ago.
That's right.
Now, why that would be is almost inexplicable. We can spend $40 million on sewers, but we can't spend...
Maybe it was because somebody didn't want to embarrass somebody who was putting sewage into the streams.
That may be the case.
Who knows?
And
Or the Conservation Foundation, frankly, that is putting chemicals into their
right.
bogs that flow into the harbor.
Well, yeah.
We don't know that's for sure.
Well,
I have to.
We do know for sure that the windswept bog flows directly into...
Pulpos Harbor.
Right, into Millbrook, which flows directly into the harbor. And when that question was raised, the first line of defense was, "Don't worry, it's all organic." Well, I'm not a scientist, but anybody will tell you that it doesn't matter whether your nitrates are organic or non-organic.
Right.
Nitrates are nitrates. So that'll be interesting. I think now that the Conservation Foundation is jumping in to do everything they can do to make sure they get the facts, but it'll be interesting to see how that all unfolds.
What was your other favorite issue?
The term limits issue I found interesting. And most of my friends, as a matter of principle, believe that the term limits are a bad idea.
A bad idea.
A bad idea, yeah. You may be one of them.
No, I'm not.
Okay, and that's right, you spoke in favor of them. I think in principle I agree. The problem is that the government gets done as a matter of practicality and not always on a matter of principle. And from a pragmatic standpoint, I am certain that our government overall would function better if we had more turnover and people stepped off once in a while and gave others a chance to step forward. I've seen too many cases where there have been problems from too much incestuousness, at individual committees, and anyway, the same problems.
But do you think it would have had a different result if it had been Article 15 instead of Article whatever it is, 88 or whatever it was?
I don't know that the result would have been different. I think it would have had considerably more support. And that's an interesting characteristic of town meeting in general is the fact that its personality can change not just night from night to night, but year to year. So I think it was as recently as last year, virtually every proposal by the planning board.
That was last year, yeah.
Yeah, was voted down.
Right.
And then this year, several articles that sounded an awful lot like the ones were shot down last year were, you know, embraced, you know, almost, you know, unanimously. And it just, I assume it's a function of the fact that housing has become such a focus, and there's an assumption that those kind of articles are going to fix housing, which is arguable.
Right.
But it's kind of
Do you
fascinating.
think the straw man that we have to do it for our children is valid?
Not entirely.
Do you think it's really valid at all?
I think it's sincere. I think it's sincere on the part of a lot of people. I think others exploit that sincerity in the interest of simply developing every square inch they possibly can while there's land left to develop.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know how many of those parcels that have been sold, subdivision is sold on that basis, that were really passed down to children, but I don't think we'll ever find out.
Right, right. And I think that there will be enough where that will be the case where everybody will feel good about the fact that we did it. You know, there'll be another generation or two of people who were able to keep their family here. But I don't think it's not a powerful enough force that it should be driving the whole argument.
You still glad you're not a selectman?
Oh, happier than ever, happier than ever. Although I still wonder about how, you know, whether and how we might be able to govern ourselves, you know, differently and better. My latest thought is that when I tune into the school committee meetings, I see how at the school committee the whole process and the agenda is driven by the superintendent.
Right.
And I think that's a much better model.
It'd be like having a town manager, a true town manager.
Right, right.
We'd be doing that.
And I think for whatever reason, our culture has always been that the selectmen want to drive the agenda and drive the process. And I think that I would point to that as the worst single element of things. And whereas Mike Kozort kind of leads the discussion at the school committee meetings, you know, Libby feels that her role is to sit there quietly unless she's asked for an opinion, then the selectmen to do everything. And you know, at a minimum, you have the problem of lack of continuity. I mean, Libby's been in her job for 30 years. You know, the average selectman term is probably 3.5.
Right.
So, you know, why shouldn't you look to Libby for a longer-term perspective and a little bit of vision for the future? But, you know, they just don't want to do it. So.
And I don't think she wants to do it.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
So. What are some of the things you'd like to see addressed in the near term going forward that may not, you know, be getting enough attention now?
Well, I'm always focused on downtown and traffic issues downtown and parking issues downtown. I've been going back and forth a lot on the High Line lately, and I'm having difficulty imagining what it's going to be like down in Harbor Square area when the High Line starts running its new boat, which I understand is almost twice as many passengers.
I don't think, well,
I don't know.
It's more.
Significantly bigger. Yeah.
Substantially more.
Yeah. I mean,
and there's one every hour.
Right.
Basically.
Right.
Between the steamship and the High Line, there'd be one every hour.
And it, you know, it's always been a problem. People getting, you know, dropping people off, picking people up. It's always been a huge problem. I just, you know, I can imagine like total gridlock.
They're moving the parking from one side of the lower Main Street to the other.
Right. Which I just can't imagine that's going to make much difference.
Well, the idea is it'll make it better going
Right.
around the corner, but.
And meanwhile, you know, you have that tank farm, which is finally going to move, that great big expanse of open land that could be developed in, in a really beautiful way, beautiful and functional way that I think could potentially alleviate a lot of those problems. So I'm happy. I'm very happy we took the first step. I mean, that was, I was very disappointed that didn't get resolved before I left office. And I was keeping my fingers crossed that they would follow through, and they did. And I give a lot of credit to the people who persevered, because that was an endless negotiation. And getting the tank farm out of town, I think, is an important first step. It'll make people realize that there's a lot of potential down there.
Well, we don't need to get into that. I was curious about what the issues really were with that, but I'm sure it all came down to economics eventually.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there were a couple. I think there was one argument was, well, we don't want to do anything that's too good for Harbor Fuel. You know, they're a private company.
Yeah.
Well, they're the only game in town. So if you're going to do anything sensible and they gain some benefit, then so be it.
Right.
And then, frankly, I think there are some people who actually would choose to keep the tank farm in town forever, because that's where it's always been, and that's Nantucket in uniqueness. I don't agree with that, but I mean, I can understand that. You know, people who don't want
Right.
anything to change ever.
Mhm.
But at some point, when the High Line's bringing in 500 people every hour, I think we have to wake up and say, wait a minute, this isn't
This isn't gonna
1955
work.
anymore.
This isn't going to work.
Yeah. So,
I know the traffic and the parking were your thing, so to speak, and one of your things, the valet service. And
I think we're ready. I actually think we are ready for a paid parking program, and I think almost everybody's ready to buy into it. The problem now seems to be who's going to actually own it and execute it. I think the police probably would be willing to give up parking enforcement. I think possibly the NRTA could take it over. It doesn't have to be a law enforcement arm. And that might make sense if the NRTA was going to get the benefit of the funds. Let them enforce the parking. Now, unfortunately, that raises a new question, which is, well, the parking enforcement is done by the summer specials. Summer specials are paid for by the ferry on embarkation fee. To some degree, the police do need the summer specials.
Right.
Do they need all of them?
They
No.
need them for crowds and so forth.
Yeah. But you'd have to have a negotiation about how to allocate the summer special money, some of which could be reinvested in parking enforcement. But there doesn't seem to be any doubt that you could raise lots and lots of money. You could beef up the bus schedule. You could probably pay for year-round buses. And at one point people said, paid parking will never work on Nantucket. Well, I think it would. It doesn't have to be parking meters. It can be kiosks that you don't even notice are there. I go to town after town on vacation where they have perfectly workable parking schemes and think to myself, wow, why can't we do this? But I don't know who's going to drive it. No pun intended. Somebody really needs to step up and own it. And everybody's just spread too thin with day-to-day business. New initiatives are hard to get underway.
Maybe with a new selectman. He can be talked into that,
Yeah.
or maybe not.
Matt Fee is always interested in this area, but I think in recent years there have simply been too many other massive projects underway that required too much time, like the sewer, and then the 2 years before that we were dealing with Baxter Road and the SBPF issues, and I think if things ever quiet down, we might be able to address some of these other issues.
But shouldn't those, I have this problem with the town, with the HDC, and with other organizations. The staff, the professional staff of the town should be the ones dealing with those issues. It should not be the Board of Selectmen. It should not be the HDC, except sort of as a last, a decision at the end.
I totally agree, but that's not the way it works.
That's right.
Yeah, and I don't know how you change that.
Won't happen easily.
No, it goes back to, the selectmen need to say, we've established improved parking, paid parking as our top priority, go get it done.
Right.
But it just doesn't seem to work that way. Well, and one reason being that the selectmen can't always reach a consensus opinion.
Right.
On the few occasions when there's been an obvious consensus and an obvious need, we are able to get things done. And I point to the town dock last year as the exception that proves the rule, as they say.
Yeah, but some of the selectmen have boats.
Right. And even as well as it worked out, there was a point at which, like, the process was saying, this will never happen. We can't do it no matter what. We got to get all these. We got to jump through all these hoops, and then finally, we just said, wait a minute, we're not going to take any excuse. Go get it done. And guess what? It got done. Without.
And it's still standing.
Still standing, and that was a very interesting experience. I got to know Sheila Lucy, the power of Sheila Lucy, a little bit more. I mean, she's quite a dynamo,
She is.
and you tell her to get something done, it gets done.
Right.
So it was refreshing and fun.
Well, as always, it's been a pleasure to talk with you.
It's always fun to be here,
Have you
and,
on, and
yeah.
thank you very much.
You're very welcome.